When it comes to the New York Mets starting rotation, we know that Jacob deGrom and Max Scherzer is the best 1-2 punch in baseball. But when they acquired Chris Bassitt in a trade a couple weeks ago, they landed a legitimate number 3 starter that was previously the ace of the Athletics. This leads me to ask the question, is Chris Bassitt the best number 3 starter in baseball? I'll answer that on today's edition of Locked On Mets.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on Twitter at FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com. So before we talk about Chris Bassitt, what he's been up to this point in his career and how he stacks up against the other number 3 stars in baseball, I want to correct myself from a couple of shows ago where I was going through the arbitration cases the Mets had. At the time of recording, I only saw 10 deals done. The Mets were actually able to come to terms with all but one of their players, and that one player is Chris Bassitt. But even though that is going to be something that has to take place during the season with an arbitration hearing happening to decide how much money Bassitt will make in his first year at the Mets, he brushed off the notion that that would be a problem today, saying, quote, "My entire outlook is I care about baseball. I don't give a shit about my contract. That's why I pay my agent to fight with the front office." So that's not going to be an issue with Bassitt. I just wanted to talk about that since I was wrong on the recording a couple of days ago. Let's talk about who Bassitt has been, though, up to this point in his career. I touched on it a bit when the Mets acquired him, and that was obviously a reactionary podcast. I was excited. We went through the deal, who the Mets gave up, all that good stuff. I don't know if I really did the best job really breaking down everything this guy offers and who he's been throughout his career. So I wanted to do that here before we compare him to the other number 3 starters in baseball that are in that same category. So first off, Bassitt is obviously coming from Oakland, where he was part of a rotation that would have been in consideration here when it comes to the best top threes with him, Sean Manaea, and Frankie Montes, all of which could be on the move. Those two guys are still rumored to be on the block. Bassitt is a former 16th round pick that made his debut with the White Sox in 2014 at 25 years old. He was traded to the Athletics prior to the 2015 season in a deal that sent Jeff Samardzija back to Chicago. In his second season with the Athletics in 2016, he goes down with Tommy John, comes back during the 2018 season, only pitches 47 and 2/3 innings, but has a 3.02 ERA. And since 2019, among pitchers who have thrown at least 300 innings, Bassitt is 12th in ERA at 3.26. He had a 2.90 ERA since 2020, and last season a 3.15 ERA and was an all-star. Now, Bassitt does not throw with great velocity. He doesn't even have great spin rates, but he is a cerebral pitcher that has 6 offerings. He mixes them well, and he generates a ton of weak contact. You look at what he did last season, he was in the top 12% of the league when it comes to hard hit percentage against. Only walked 6.1% of the batters he faced, which puts him in the top 20% of the league in that category. He is above average in most of the metrics except for chase rate, whiff rate, fastball velocity, fastball spin, curveball spin. So again, it's not an elite spin pitcher, not an elite velocity pitcher, but he's able to get weak contact and he doesn't put himself in any trouble because he throws strikes, he pounds the zone. He's just what you want out of a pitcher. You know, a guy that doesn't have the deGrom or Scherzer stuff, but makes up for it with that ability, again, to mix all these different offerings well and to not put himself in any holes. The one thing that I can say that's interesting about his arsenal is he doesn't really have any pitch that's elite, but every single pitch had a put away percentage above 20%, except for his sinker, which was 19 and change. So the point being, while he doesn't have any elite strikeout pitch, he can get a strikeout with any of his offerings. So he's a pitcher that just brings a lot to the table for this Mets team and a really interesting, wrinkle in the rotation to go from the velocity and the overpowering dominance of a deGrom and a Scherzer for the first two games of a series. And then you can throw in that wrinkle of a Bassitt who doesn't throw as hard, but is going to mix up so many different pitches. That's going to be tough for lineups to be able to adjust to be gearing up all weekend for, 96 plus with deGrom and Scherzer, and then you face a Bassitt. It's just going to really throw teams off. I think he can have a really solid season because of that. And really, when you break down his year last season, one of the things I love when looking at pitchers, particularly starting pitchers, is to go through the game logs because I want to see, when you go out there, how often did you give your team a chance to win? That's kind of like when I was doing the deep dive into Zach Greinke. And even though he had some starts where he got blown up, for the most part, he was giving his team a chance to win. So if you look at the breakdown of Chris Bassitt's 27 starts last year, he only gave up more than 3 earned runs 5 times. He also went at least 5 innings in all but 5 starts. So that just shows you right there that for the most part, when he's going out there, he's going to give you some length and he's not going to get lit up. You look at his starts, he gave up 2 earned runs or less in 19 of his 27 starts. Had 15 quality starts, which of course means he went at least 6 and gave up, is it 3 or less? I think it's 3 or less. I don't know what a quality start is. It's crazy. I'm pretty positive I know what I'm talking about, but yeah, 3 earned runs or less. For a second, I was like, is it 2? But no, it's 3 earned runs or less. So yeah, quality starts, abundance of them last year. Just a good starting pitcher. And that leads me to ask the question that this podcast is all about here. Is Chris Bassitt the best number 3 starter in baseball? Because the Mets already have the best duo. I don't want to hear any arguments about some other starters, although when I go through this list, we will mention some teams that I guess can make a case, right? Like the Dodgers, Walker Buehler and Julio Urias, the Brewers. There's some teams that maybe have stars that are in the conversation. I just think that Jacob deGrom is head and shoulders so much better than everyone else, and Max Scherzer has been better than everyone else over a decade span here. That to me, there's no question about the 1-2, and that leads us to wonder if the Mets had the best trio when you include Bassitt. Is he the best number 3 starter in baseball? We'll talk about that more in just a minute. But first, I want to tell you about what's clearly the best tasting protein bar on the market, which of course is Built Bar. Built Bars come low in calorie, low in sugar, but they are high in protein and high in fiber. There are so many amazing flavors to choose from, whether it's the mint brownie, coconut almond, my personal favorite, cookies and cream. All Built Bars come covered in 100% real chocolate, as do their new puffs, which are the first ever protein infused marshmallows, which are fluffy, marshmallowy. They are not just a protein bar, they're a treat with fan favorite flavors such as the incredible, yummy cinnamony churro, the coconut marshmallow, and the banana cream pie. All so good. They're sure to be your next favorite snack. If you want to try anything Built Bar has to offer today, go to built.com. Make sure you use the promo code LOCK15, and you're going to get 15% off your next order. Again, that's promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at built.com. All right, so one of the things that became clear to me when doing this exercise is just how flush we are right now in baseball with pitching talent. It's just ridiculous. I have 10 rotations here that I felt like qualified when it came to their number 3 starter being in the same conversation as a Chris Bassitt. So that just shows you how much depth there is around the league, that there are so many teams that really have that many quality starters atop their rotation. The first 5 I'm going to go through are the rotations where I feel like the number 3 just isn't quite in the same league as a Chris Bassitt, just slightly below him when it comes to what I would expect from them this season, but also pitchers that I think we could look up at the end of this year and that could change. They could be better than a Chris Bassitt. So we'll start with the Chicago White Sox, who would probably, maybe in the second part of this, in the rotations where I think it's kind of head to head. We're going to go through in the final segment today, which is the White Sox. And it's because they previously had Carlos Rodon, which would have pushed Lucas Giolito down to be their number 3. And I think that is a much more interesting conversation than where they're at with Dylan Cease. Lucas Giolito had a 3.53 ERA last season. The last 3 years, he's been right around there. A really dominant pitcher, has a no-hitter on his resume. So the Giolito Bassitt conversation would have been an interesting one. They have Lance Lynn as their ace coming off a great season with a 2.69 ERA. But Dylan Cease is just not the same pitcher as Bassitt. A 4.39 career ERA, last year 3.91. His F4 was better, which is worth mentioning, a 4.4 F4 compared to Bassitt's 3.3. But I think that is more due to innings pitched and strikeouts that gives Cease a little bit of an edge. I still think Bassitt is a much better pitcher than Dylan Cease. You go to the Phillies in division. You got Zach Wheeler, Aaron Nola, and Ranger Suarez as my projected top three in this rotation. And really, it just comes down to the inexperience of Suarez. Unbelievable season, 1.36 ERA. Was great out of the bullpen, ends up starting at the end of the season for that team. I just don't know if he's going to hold up the same way if he's in that rotation for a full season. Still a young pitcher that has a lot to learn. Zach Wheeler was the runner-up for the Cy Young. He was great. Aaron Nola has a top 3 Cy Young finish on his resume and, 2 top 10 finishes. A really good pitcher. I do think that there's no comparison when it comes to Wheeler, Nola to deGrom, Scherzer, but you could still see that rotation come together and being really great this year. I just don't think it's quite to the level of the Mets. Staying in division, the Braves. Max Fried, Charlie Morton, Ian Anderson is the top 3 I'm projecting right now. You have Fried with a 3.04 ERA last year, Morton 3.34, and Anderson 3.58. Again, Bassitt's numbers are better than Ian Anderson. The one thing I'll say about the Braves is they might have the deepest rotation in this division when you have Huascar Ynoa, you have Mike Soroka, Tucker Davidson, Kyler Miller, Kyle Wright, Tuki Toussaint. They just have a lot of young arms to throw at you. They have great coverage if they have some injuries. So they're a really deep rotation with a ton of talent. But I think the Mets top 3, and particularly the number 3 with Bassitt for this conversation, is better than an Ian Anderson. We move on to the Toronto Blue Jays. Jose Barrios, Kevin Gausman, and Hyun-Jin Ryu. Very simply put, Ryu was not as good as Bassitt last year, a 4.37 ERA, but this is a guy that, competed with Jacob deGrom for a Cy Young in 2019. You could see it, right? You could see Ryu having another really strong season and maybe being better than Bassitt, but for now, Bassitt is comfortably better in my opinion. Then we go to the San Diego Padres. Joe Musgrove would be the ace based on the numbers last season. Here is the interesting thing about the Padres. I think all of us can understand that Blake Snell and Yu Darvish each have higher ceilings than a Chris Bassitt. They can win Cy Youngs. But last year, a 4.20 ERA for Snell, a 4.22 ERA for Darvish. You do wonder if the sticky substance ban affected Yu Darvish. He was one of those main pitchers we really focused on when that ban happened. So curious how he'll continue to adjust and try to rediscover what he was. Musgrove was great last year, 3.18 ERA. Don't know if he'll do that again. That's a rotation that is really boom or bust. They also have Mike Clevenger coming off Tommy John. I'm not sure when he's going to factor into the rotation this season, but he has been very good in the past. Another rotation I really like, but again, if it comes to the number 3 starter and we're comparing either Snell or Darvish to Bassitt last year, Bassitt was better for sure. But again, those guys probably have a higher ceiling. They definitely have a better chance at winning a Cy Young this year. I don't think there's any question about that. Regardless, there's 5 more teams now that we have that have rotations. And when you really get down to these teams, it gets harder to continue to put Bassitt ahead of some of these guys. But we'll get to that in just a minute because it is that time of year again as college basketball's tournament is finally upon us. From all the latest odds, contests, and player props, BetOnline.net is the number 1 source for all of your sports betting needs and info. BetOnline remains the best spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sports wagering information needs, including live betting and your favorite Vegas casino games. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, so we've already mentioned 2 rotations in the National League East, which tells you how dominant this division could be pitching-wise. Then I'm about to mention a third one, which is the Miami Marlins. They could have the best rotation in this division. And I know that sounds crazy when you consider the fact that the Mets have deGrom, Scherzer, and Bassitt. But I like the Marlins' depth more when their back-end guys are LCR Hernandez, Jesus Luzardo, Sixto Sanchez, Max Myers, a prospect that can make a big impact this year. They got some. I mean, this is 2015 Mets vibes with this Marlins team. They have a really good rotation. That's why it's a good thing they didn't do more offensively because they could be a team that just really surprises people. The more I look at that pitching, the more I think that the Marlins are a lot closer to the Phillies than they're going to get credit for. I don't know if they're going to be able to put it all together and be a winning team, but I would be shocked if they didn't win at least 75 games, if not pushing closer to being a winning ball club, over 80 wins, over 82, 83, 84. They just got a lot of talent. And you look at the top of the rotation: Sandy Alcantara, or Alcantara, 3.19 ERA, eclipsed 200 innings pitched last year. Trevor Rogers, I really think, is going to be the ace of this Marlins staff. If you remember last season, I was so high on him when I watched him pitch against the Mets. The guy is absolutely filthy from the left side. 2.64 ERA, 28.5 strikeout percentage. Nearly striking out 30% of the batters he faced in 133 innings. If he had stayed healthy the whole year, I think he would have edged out Jonathan India in the Rookie of the Year voting, but he ended up getting a little bit banged up. Still, though, just a dynamic 1-2 punch. And then Pablo Lopez, one of the most underrated starting pitchers in baseball, 3.07 ERA, strikeout rate of 27.5% over just over 100 innings last year. Look, you can make the argument that Lopez could be better than Bassitt. Bassitt just has a larger track record. So when it comes to these 5 teams, this is the one where I still give Bassitt the edge. And I also think that it's hard to not give the Mets the edge on the top 2 in the rotation over those 2 in Miami. But again, that Marlins rotation has a ceiling as high as any in baseball. It's a ridiculous plethora of young talent there. Now we get to maybe the closest direct comp to Chris Bassitt when it comes to the stats last season, which is Anthony DeSclafani for the Giants. They have Logan Webb and now Carlos Rodon added in free agency. Webb was great last year. Rodon, arguably could have won a Cy Young had he stayed healthy. So that's a really good 1-2 punch. And DeSclafani, I mean, a 3.17 ERA, that's right in line with Bassitt at 3.15, 167 and 2/3 innings pitched. The WARs are similar. You can make an argument they're the same pitcher based on last season alone. Now, I think Bassitt's track record is slightly better than DeSclafani, but I also think the Giants are really good at maximizing their pitchers. So I don't really know if I could say for sure that Bassitt is better, but I also can't say that DeSclafani is better. This is where we get to the point where you might have to argue for these top 3 rotations, or at least the top 3 number 3 starters over the Mets. So we'll go with the Houston Astros next. You got Framber Valdez, 3.14 ERA last year and 134 and 2/3 innings pitched. Lance McCullers, 3.16 and just over 160 innings. You have Luis Garcia at 3.48, just over 150 innings pitched. So those are some really nice options. But the wild card that could be considered their number 3 this season is Justin Verlander, coming off Tommy John. And I feel like a Verlander Bassitt conversation, it's hard to go with Chris Bassitt, even with the fact that he's coming off the healthy season and you have no idea what Verlander's going to give you. But Verlander's a first ballot Hall of Famer. So that's where I go with this. And I also want to move right over to another first ballot Hall of Famer, which is Clayton Kershaw, who is the number 3 starter for the Dodgers. Last year, Kershaw had a 3.55 ERA. Bassitt was better. But again, do you bet against the first ballot Hall of Famers in this discussion? I don't know. Walker Buehler, 2.47 ERA, one of the best pitchers in baseball, certainly in that same tier as a deGrom and a Scherzer, even if I like the 2 of them slightly more. Really deGrom over Buehler. I don't even know if I could say that I like Scherzer more than Buehler. Buehler is an unbelievable pitcher. So is Julio Urias, who's their number 2 starter, a 2.96 ERA last season in nearly 200 innings, got over 185. Look, that 1-2-3 is as good as the Mets 1-2-3. It just is. You're splitting hairs. I think I would probably still give the Mets an edge just because of deGrom. But man, is that a really good rotation. And then that leaves us to with arguably the best rotation in baseball. I think I would give them the edge, even though I emotionally said the Mets had the best rotation when they got Bassitt, because if you have a 1-2 of deGrom and Scherzer and you add in an ace from another team who's going to pitch to a low 3 ERA, I was like, look, this team's awesome. I believe in Carrasco bouncing back. I think Taijuan Walker can be closer to the first half version of himself than the second half version. So I still see the Mets as having a great rotation, but you look at the Milwaukee Brewers top to bottom, and they are so talented. You got Corbin Burns, who just won the Cy Young, a 2.43 ERA in 167 innings with advanced metrics that are absolutely eye-popping and better than anyone in the league not named deGrom. You got Woodruff with a 2.56 ERA and almost 180 innings pitched. He was in some ways the ace, even though Burns was the Cy Young. It's weird to say that, but he was able to work a little bit more. They leaned on him slightly more, or they pushed him a little bit further in some of those games. But just a great 1-2 punch. Then you have Freddie Peralta, a 2.81 ERA and 144 and a third last year. A better pitcher based on the stats than Chris Bassitt. Then you throw in the back end options for that Brewers team. You have Eric Lauer and Adrian Hauser. Both had low 3 ERAs. That rotation's better than the Mets rotation, I think. It's hard for me to look at this without bias and push the Mets in front of them. But the fact is the Mets are able, if everything breaks right, which I guess you can say for any team, but the ceiling of this rotation when you have a 1-3 like the Mets have, when Carlos Carrasco has had the success in his career that he has had, when Taijuan Walker has flashes of being a really good pitcher, even a Tyler McGill that I'm higher on than I think the general, national media pundit would be. I think McGill can give the Mets 15 really good starts this year as that sixth man in the rotation, filling in when guys get hurt. I really like what the Mets have. And I think Chris Bassitt is clearly one of the best 5 number 3 starters in baseball, but it just shows you how freaking stacked this league is with pitching, that a guy like Bassitt can come into this rotation, previously be an ace, get slotted in behind 2 of the greatest pitchers we've ever seen, and there's a conversation about the top threes around the league that the Mets might not have the best one. And again, I look at the Dodgers, I look at the Brewers, I even look at the ceiling of the Astros when you factor in a Verlander. I look at the potential of the Marlins and even just the way that the Giants seem to manufacture incredible pitching performances year over year. And there's no guarantee that's the best top 3 in baseball. Just insane. Anyway, that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets this week on Locked On Mets. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you follow me on Twitter at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. Now for your second listen, check out Locked On MLB, hosted by Paul Francis Sullivan, but we all call him Sully. Locked On MLB is where you want to go to learn about everything going on in the league right now, and also to learn about great moments from the past. You can follow Locked On MLB wherever you get podcasts.